Okay, United 82, you're clear for runway 27, United 82. Okay.
Okay, that's great.
Okay.
Again, a little louder.
Okay, Challenger, go for throttle up.
Michael, anything we might not have caught on the earlier video that we did that was on the fly, why don't you fill in the gaps as far as your background in case we missed out on some of that?
Sure, be glad to. I'm a military aerospace historian. The primary focus of my research deals with classified black budget aircraft developed within the military-industrial complex. I'm really interested in preserving an important part of our national history, and I think it's important that someone documents the classified or unacknowledged special access program world that we as taxpayers are all paying for, but that have no congressional oversight or no public scrutiny. So that's certainly what we want to talk about today.
Okay, very good. And so, where do we start this time?
Well, I think we should pick up where we left off earlier in the week. We were just about ready to get into the Norton Air Force Base exhibit that took place November the 12th, 1988 at Norton Air Force Base. This is an actual event that really did occur. And here you can see the actual San Bernardino newspaper clipping. It says Norton Flyby Finale, and then it says poor visibility shortens Thunderbird show. So what happened here is IFR conditions prevailed during this particular day, and the lead Thunderbird pilot, he called the other pilots and said, you know what, gentlemen, this demonstration is canceled for today. We can no longer continue this show because the clouds are too low, so they had to cancel the show. However, concurrently going on at the same time as this Thunderbird demonstration, there was another show, you could say. We'll call it a exhibit. This was a classified exhibit to garner support for black programs. We know that Congressman George E. Brown Jr. was present. We also know that Senator Alan Cranston was present, and a number of high-level military brass. And that took place inside this large hangar right here. They actually call it the big hangar on base. And it's this hangar complex right here. It's a Quonset style hangar, and inside this hangar were a whole series of classified aircraft, one of which we've called the Pulsar or Flaming Pumpkin Seed, and this is from Aviation Week Space Technology, December 24th, 1990. It says, scientists and engineers, dreams taking to skies as black aircraft. Now this illustration was done via the testimony of one particular aerospace engineer who was at this exhibit, and this was done by Mark McCandlish. So this is actually Mark's drawing that was published in Aviation Week Space Technology.
And that's based on his conversations with some of the people that were there.
With one specific individual who was at this exhibit.
Okay,
Definitely.
And are we able to say that person's name?
We can, but we've been acknowledged not to mention his name. It's been talked about before, and if anyone does a little research on this particular air show, that name will pop up. So
okay, yeah, I think perhaps I know who it is.
Yes. Now this vehicle measured approximately 100 feet long, 65 feet wide. It was a flattened football diamond-shaped vehicle, completely black, completely composed of thermal resistant, heat resistant tiles taken directly off the space shuttle. There were a series of control surfaces along the leading and trailing edge of the vehicle, completely unmanned, tricycle landing gear. It had stainless steel wire mesh wheels for the actual wheels. There were two NACA air intake slots on either side of the center line of the vehicle. And then there was this very interesting ridge line right here. So, how this thing actually flew. The conventional turbojet engines would bring this aircraft up to about Mach 3. Once that happens, the entire leading edge of this vehicle is glowing red hot. That's very important to keep in mind. Once that happens, via a number of sections right in here, you can see this right here, there are these air intakes that are slammed shut, making it very aerodynamically efficient. So in essence what they're doing here is they're now transferring over to a secondary propulsion system. So they shut down the turbojet engines, and then what happens is they start introducing a modified liquid methane fuel with a boron-based additive directly into the superheated shock wave of this aircraft. and it immediately expands, compresses between the superheated shockwave and the tapered afterbody of this vehicle, pushing it across the sky at about 12,000 miles an hour. It also had 121 launch tubes, each containing a 1/10 megaton warhead that could be launched in 1/10 of a second. So this is the level of technology we had in the mid to late 1980s, Kerry. Just an incredible level of power forcement. This was a bargaining chip with Reagan during the summits with Gorbachev, so we absolutely could go into Moscow and there's nothing they could do to stop us.
Very interesting. Okay.
Absolutely. So we should make the point too, though, is if you see something documented in Aviation Week Space Technology, and then you page over here and you see almost the identical vehicle featured in Jane's Defense Weekly, it's a done deal. You can bank on it. We do have something that flies, looks and flies like this, absolutely without any doubt at all. Now, there was another vehicle at this display, and incidentally, all of these aircraft, they had a plaque standing in front of them, giving you an idea of what this aircraft looked like and also the performance specifications. This we've called the Super Stall. The Super Stall. It was a Marine attack aircraft one-off. It had a conventional tail arrangement, had outrigger wheels for the landing gear. It had a conventional F-16 heads-up display. But then you'll notice here these very strange and unusual miniature turbofan engines that tapered back to a platypus exhaust port, and then these interesting Venetian blind wings made out of a heat-resistant Inconel metal. Now, the concept being that the pilot had the capability of varying the angle of attack of these Venetian blind wings from 0 to 45 degrees. And by way of the Coanda effect, this aircraft could take off vertically. It had a 25mm Gatling gun up front taken directly off the A-10 Warthog tank buster aircraft. So this was another aircraft that was at this display. This is a 3D color rendering, and you can see that all of these Venetian blind wing sections here are now jointed from tail to leading edge, forming one complete wing section, and then by way of that Coanda effect, this aircraft can take off vertically. So this was another aircraft at that display.
Okay, and this is what year?
This is November the 12th, 1988. Norton Air Force Base.
I see. And these are, in other words, these would be declassified, isn't that right?
These were and still are classified black budget programs paid for by our tax dollars, and then this display was to garner support for further funding of these programs. That was the whole idea behind the exhibit.
Okay, so what they're demonstrating here, though, was in the public, once it's demonstrated, is in the public domain?
It is not in the public domain.
Oh.
This was in a gigantic hangar at Norton, hidden away from all other views. So when everyone's watching the Thunderbirds fly by, another exhibit's taking place inside the big hangar at Norton.
And this is the invitation only
This is the
group.
invitation only classified exhibit, not open for public display.
Right, I understand. Okay.
Absolutely. So, again, here we have Lockheed Skunk Works, and this is in Palmdale. This is the L-1011 hangar. Now, the B portion, there was an A portion of this exhibit and a B portion. The A portion covered the aircraft that we had just spoke about. The B portion, which we believe may have actually taken place in this large hangar here, and you can see the large bypass doors. This is a pickup truck over here, so you can just get an idea of the size of this hangar. Big, very large hangar. There were 3 of these vehicles. This is the original color line marker drawing of something called the Alien Reproduction Vehicle, or what's known as the Flux Liner, because it was based on the principles of high voltage electrical charges. Now, the aircraft, we really can't call them aircraft because they don't fly in the actual principles of aerodynamics, but there were 3 of these vehicles present at this display. They measured 24, that's the smaller one. The next one was 60 feet in diameter. The final one was 130 feet in diameter, so you can get a size of just how large these vehicles were. The smaller one had a few of these composite panels removed, which were fastened by Zeus fasteners, showing the internal components of the vehicle. Upper crew compartment had 6 CCD cameras and 1 on top for a total of 7, and they were, quote, directly off the Vegas casinos, and this entire vehicle used existing aerospace components which were already pre-existing in the aerospace industry. So this is an off-the-shelf type component vehicle.
Okay, but this is a drawing based on the memory, I'm guessing, of one of the observers.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct, yes. Yes, that is correct. Now, these CCD cameras produce an artificial image on the inside of the pilot's visor via the Apache helicopter display. And there was 4 ejection seat systems taken directly off the F-4 Phantom. So again, you can see this off-the-shelf technology using things that are already pre-existing. Now, down the central column, we know that there were approximately 24 oxygen tanks surrounding the lower circumference of the lower section of the vehicle, and we believe possibly that there was 11¼ pounds of enriched uranium-238 as some type of residual power source. This section right here is the 12-foot diameter Tesla coil, and there was a series of capacitor plates that were stacked positive and negative, with the positive plate always on top, because we know from B-field-Brown effect that when you apply an electrical charge to a capacitor, there is a movement in the direction of the positive charge. So that was interesting to keep in mind too. Now, Mark McCandlish cleaned up the original drawing, came up with this drawing, which was part of the May 9th, 2001 Disclosure Project representative meeting in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club.
Okay.
That's where that came from. What's interesting to note here, though, is you'll see that there's an articulated arm here. Now, why would they have this? Okay, and they also have a submarine hatch door. The question is, why would you need an articulated arm? Perhaps are they going somewhere to take samples? Does this have anything to do with Ben Rich's comment before he passed away, where he said that we have things flying that are 50 years beyond what you could possibly even dream of? Well, if that's true, then yes, we're going someplace with this. Perhaps the other planets in our solar system, maybe even out of our solar system. Or this could just be for the release of classified NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, DoD satellites. We just don't know. We just don't know that part of the story. But we do know that there was an articulated arm associated with this vehicle. So the big question then is, how does this actually fly? You can see this color illustration here. Well, what they're doing is they're taking a high voltage electrical charge, they're feeding it into this 12-foot diameter Tesla coil. As soon as that happens, there's a magnetic field that forms above this craft in the form of a toroid donut. And by way of this rheostat device, the pilot had the capability of overlaying these field lines onto these capacitor plates, causing pitch, yaw, and roll. So if you wanted to go into a certain direction, you would apply more power on one side, and then it would start to move in the other direction. So that's how they had the capability of making these, huge, quickly high G turns, and some of these have been mistaken as extraterrestrial vehicles, when in point of fact, it's our own deep black programs paid for by our tax dollars.
Okay, do you think this craft is very efficient?
That's a good question. The fact that they've already made 3 of them indicates that perhaps there's more than 3. We also know that the gentleman who was the MC of this exhibit stated that these, quote, had superluminal type technology or performance, meaning they could go faster than the speed of light. They're tapping into the ambient zero-point energy field. So what they're doing is they're accessing and amplifying those billions of electrically charged particles, not only in our atmosphere, but also out into the universe. And at that point, you don't need anything on board the vehicle. You already have a pre-existing source of power. So again, yes, in that case, it would be very efficient.
Okay.
And so we need to get this technology. Why won't this technology trickle down to the airline industry, to the power utilities? Why are we still using these coal-fired plants? I mean, this is an absolute tragedy that this technology is not being trickled down. It is time that these programs be declassified, put within the public domain, so we can turn this whole thing around, and that's what we're endeavoring to do.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Very well said. Okay, so where do you want to go from here?
Well, we could cover some of the even more exotic UFO cases. If you want, we can talk about Bob Lazar. We've got the illustrations for that. We can go into all the QFOS cases because there's over 50,000 files within the QFOS cases, of which 3 years were spent vetting out the best cases in their collection that only had the appropriate paperwork and documentation to back it up with an original sketch. So we can also consider that as well.
Okay, and this is work you've done or someone else has done?
This is work I've done over a period of 3 years, going through each and every
Wow.
50,000 cases.
That's
it was a
incredible.
monumental undertaking. Yes.
So, and you were looking for cases that specifically had the right documentation
Yeah.
to where you felt that they were basically
Sure.
impeccable.
I mean, a lot of those cases were just a light in the sky, or they were unexplained, or they were completely just unidentified, perhaps flares or something. A lot of the cases just didn't seem to amount to anything. I only took the cases that had a really good sketch and the case file number to go along with it. So those were the two criteria that I used.
Okay, and how many cases did you end up with?
I ended up with about 100 solid cases.
Okay.
I mean, really solid, that I felt that there was something to it. I mean, you can tell when you start reading these cases that these people are on the up and up. They have nothing to gain by this, and they're just saying, I'd like to forward this to the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. We'd like to get your professional assessment of what you think this vehicle might be, and I'm just handing it off to you. And so that's exactly what we did. I took the original sketch, I redrew that in AutoCAD, took the AutoCAD file out, produced a 3D SolidWorks rendering, so now we have something that's very cleaned up and up to date, and we're maintaining our history.
Okay, now couple questions. One, did you work with Rich Dolan at all? Because I can see how your work would back up a lot of what he does.
Richard did call Mark and I for some additional details on the ARV and a few other programs, and we helped out just in one chapter of that book. But beside that, I haven't worked with Richard in a professional regime.
Okay, well, very interesting, because your work really does complement his. Now, for example, because obviously we don't have time to go through 100 cases, but
Sure.
I wonder if you could maybe pick out a couple really stellar ones.
Sure, yeah.
And then show us the kind of research you did along the lines of those cases. In other words, show us the drawings and go step by step with us.
Sure.
And so let's put a few of those on camera.
Okay. We sort of talked about this before, and this actually comes from Mark McCandlish, and it is definitely worthy of perhaps mentioning again. This is the stealthy faceted aerospace prototype, Cedarville, California, 1982. True story. This vehicle was seen by about 12 eyewitnesses. It was approximately 600 feet per leg here, so it's very, very large vehicle. This vehicle was seen at about 15 degrees angle of attack down, 5 degrees to the left side, making a low frequency humming or pulsing noise that people could feel in their chest. So it was visual, we had audio, and there were two groups of people that really saw this vehicle. There was one group that were very excited. They were just amazed at what they saw. The other group were horrified to their soul. They thought this might be something from the devil. And if we only had an original sketch, we wouldn't have much to go on, but we do actually have the Polaroid photograph of the vehicle itself. It's kind of hard to see this, but you can see the people pull off to the side of the road, and the vehicle, that's the craft right there. So there were at least 12 people who saw this craft, and I mean, it just doesn't get much better than that. Fantastic sighting. After about 10 minutes, it tipped up into the vertical, shot away at a high rate of speed. So I believe that this was one of our very early designs that was made at the same time as the F-117A, because if you look at the way that this vehicle has been made, it's using the same faceted flat plate technology that the F-117A uses. So,
which is that diamond, you call it Diamond Star?
The hopeless diamond faceted flat plate cut looking vehicle, the identical type technology. So again, it's a guess, but it's a pretty good guess that Lockheed was the prime contractor for that particular aircraft.
Okay, very interesting.
Definitely. Move on here to a couple of other projects here. This is important to note too. Probably The most well-documented UFO case, perhaps beside Roswell, is the famous Cash Landrum case, December 29th, 1980, Huffman, Texas. We had Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, Colby Landrum. We're driving down the road after a cafe meal they had. This was at night, and this ice cream cone-looking vehicle came down from the sky, lighted up the whole area. They were shocked and horrified to see this thing park itself right in front of the road that they were traveling down. And every time it spewed out flames from the bottom, this vehicle would bob up and then it would come back down again, and then flames would come out again. And then after perhaps absolutely no more than 7 minutes or so, probably much less than that, this vehicle flew away. Of course, Betty Cash went to the front of her vehicle to perhaps get a better look at that, and as she came back toward her car, she put her hand on the handle there, and it was hot. She burned herself. But what's interesting to note is, as this vehicle was departing, there were no less than 23 double-rotor CH-47 Chinook helicopters chasing the Cash Landrum vehicle. So we have multiple eyewitnesses, we have physical trace case, because the Army Corps of Engineers later came back and redug up this road, repaved it, they've completely moved the whole area, and we have the helicopter pilots who saw it as well. So this is such a solid case, it's incredible. It has never been explained by the U.S. government. They tried to pass it off. So they are responsible. They are directly responsible for the physical injury, and in this case, 2 deaths. So we are going to hold the United States government liable for what they did to these people, and they will be an accounting for that, absolutely.
Okay, now when you say you're going to hold them liable, are you saying that that craft was one of ours?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, isn't that wild? Okay,
there was a whole breach. This was part of this was the ending section of the NEPA program. That's the Nuclear Energy for Propulsion of Aircraft. By 1960, the United States Air Force, the United States Navy, and the Atomic Energy Commission had procurement funding of up to $800 million by 1960 for an atomic or nuclear-powered aircraft program. Are we to believe that nothing came of that? I believe that this was one of the mid-range technology demonstrators that had a malfunction, and then it flew away, and the government tried to cover the whole thing up. Yes, I'm saying it was one of ours. Absolutely.
Okay, and how did those people die?
They died of cancer. They lost their hair.
Oh.
Yes, absolutely. So we are holding the United States government liable for the death of 2 people. We're not going to let them get away with it. We can't. So clearly, I mean, would an extraterrestrial vehicle, like make an emergency landing on a dark road and then start bobbing up and down, spewing out flames, and then have these guys chase after it? No.
I see.
It's very clear. It's very clear.
Okay. Well, okay. So chasing after it, in other words, to rescue it. In other words, not to
track it.
But if it's one of ours, in other words, they wouldn't have to, in theory, unless it's operated by some rogue government or, what I'm saying, in other words, some rogue group. The chasing helicopters indicate to me, or seem to indicate, that perhaps it's being operated by...
It could be a remotely piloted vehicle. It could be a UAV. Okay. I mean, clearly they had a heads up on it. They were after it. And the fact that 23 were after it means that there was foreknowledge. They knew something. Somebody was scrambled and they
but it actually, I mean, and I appreciate that you think it's one of ours, and it certainly sounds like it would be one of ours, although ours is a group. In other words, we don't know who's working with who, especially behind the scenes in the secret space program.
Sure.
And if you have to release that many helicopters to chase a vehicle, the indication is that it is gone rogue, or it is operating against the rules in some form or fashion. Otherwise, you would just maybe send 2 or 3 to follow it around and then go retrieve it when it stopped or something.
That's a good point.
So sounds like there's some kind of, I mean, you're basically painting almost a battle scenario.
That's true. Now, the other thing too is that if that's true regarding the scrambling of these CH-47s, now they perhaps might also have to have shielding as well. because then they're going to suffer from the same effects as the three individuals did. So
Okay.
that's important to keep in mind. Now, I'm not saying that everything out there is man-made. Clearly, as we mentioned before, UFO sightings date back to the ancient Romans and Egyptians. So to say that everything is man-made is not, in tune with the historical record. But clearly, there is a whole series of black-budget aircraft that have been developed within secret locations. Lockheed Skunk Works. We've got the Northrop Black Widow Group. We've got the Boeing Phantom Works Group. We don't know what these people are doing. People that work at Area 51, thousands of people are working there every day. We don't have a need to know. They don't tell us. Things at Palmdale, Air Force Plant 42. People go there every day working at the Skunk Works. We have no idea what's going on there. So we do not want to underestimate what $400 billion per year in black budget funding can make.
Okay,
Sure.
Absolutely. And this
Yeah.
was what year, this particular?
This was December 29th, 1980, Huffman, Texas.
Okay,
Yep.
quite a while ago.
Yeah, it's been quite a
Interesting.
while. Here's an interesting report. Overseas Sun, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Skunk Works, the evidence stacks up to a near certainty that a revolutionary step has been made in aircraft design. Yeah, absolutely. Lockheed Skunk Works, from the very beginning when Kelly Johnson headed up the group, and then when Ben Rich took over the reins from Kelly Johnson back in 1975, they have been making a quantum leap in technology. There's no doubt about it. We've got things that are flying that are 50 years beyond what we can possibly even dream of, and then Ben Rich says that there are some things, some certain programs that we can't talk about that are appropriate to keep quiet at this time. Absolutely. Ben Rich had so much to say that he had to withhold because this was a national security issue, but absolutely the Skunk Works, probably above any other aerospace prime contractor, has made that quantum leap.
Okay,
They definitely
yeah,
have.
absolutely.
Boeing Phantom Works Bird of Prey, we spoke about that earlier in our discussion. We can move back a couple chapters here. We want to consider the case over 1966 South Vietnam. This originates with Mark McCandlish. You can see here, this was a gigantic, now he said it was a 1/4 mile in diameter. Well, if you look at the proportions and the scaling here, it's actually significantly larger than a 1/4 mile diameter. South Vietnam, 1960, at night sighting. Crew of B-52s ran into this vehicle. They saw this at night. They circled it at least 3 times. There was about 28 levels or floors on the upper transparent cupola or dome of the vehicle, and the B-52 crew members said that they saw beings looking out at them. Okay, but then along the circumference of the disc there was a series of rotor blades that were going around. But what's interesting about this case is that as this craft departed the area, it somehow opened up some type of wormhole or space-time continuum or something. And as it departed, you can see here Mark's original drawing. What the B-52 crew members saw as this thing flew away is completely blue sky with white puffy clouds, and then after a few seconds it trickled back to darkness, and then as the B-52 landed at its destination point, they were debriefed by FBI members. So somewhere out there, there is a case file on this sighting of this 1966 South Vietnam encounter with a B-52 and a gigantic mothership type flying saucer. It's a part of the historical record that
Okay,
needs to be
but
tracked.
you're saying they were debriefed by members of the FBI. What are the members of the FBI doing, and are we assuming they're still in South Vietnam, or did they fly somewhere else?
I think they were already based there. There's no way they could have been there, that quickly.
Okay,
They wanted
so
to,
they're
Yeah.
debriefed, and you've got the FBI operating in South Vietnam?
apparently so. Apparently
And
so.
where was the story as far as their debriefing? Is this coming from some of the people that were
Well,
involved?
this came from Mark McCandlish, who interviewed one of the B-52 crew members who described this case.
Ah,
And then Mark told that to me. He put together that original sketch, and from that I created a couple of 3D renderings just so that we have something to look at, a visual aid. So, this is a fantastic case file. Without a doubt, this is probably one of the top cases in ufology, absolutely, and it's really never been talked about.
Okay, and again, what year is this?
This is 1966 South Vietnam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating.
Very interesting case. Moving on here, just really quickly, we can talk about Bob Lazar. Interesting to note here is that, according to Bob himself, he worked at Area S4 from December 1988 to April 1989. So in point of fact, he was only there for a few months. He wasn't there for a number of years, but he was there for a few months. And there's a number of things that, although as controversial as this is, there are some really good supporting evidence to back this up. Number one, the color of the buses that take you from Area 51, which is called the Remote Test Site, or Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. That is the actual military designation for Area 51. Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3, it's an offshoot of Edwards Air Force Base. That's actually what's going on here. Janet Airlines, gateway to Area 51, that's at the McCarran Airport Terminal. EG&G is the prime contractor for Area 51. They have now been bought out by another company. Over here we can see the writing that Bob talked about when the craft was energized. We have the antimatter reactor with the element 115, and how they get the element 115 to Area S4 for the test flights is that element 115 is machined into triangles at Los Alamos, and then I believe a specially configured nest team takes that very valuable element 115 to the test site and then to S4. That's how it's transported. Okay, next thing to remember too is that
When you say they take it, you're talking about in vehicles or fly it?
some type, I don't even know if they would take the chance to fly it. I mean, if
I
you
see.
crash that aircraft somewhere over Las Vegas and you've got element 115 down Hollywood Boulevard or something, or Flamingo or something, they can't take that risk. They've got, I think they transport it via a specially configured nest team by truck or something. It just makes sense to me that they would do it that way.
All right.
The Delta configuration, the Omicron configuration, this vehicle had no wires to speak of. Almost a symbiotic type flight control system, so there were no wires associated with this vehicle. Interesting point on Bob's security badge. He had two vertical blue stripes, so that's important to keep in mind too, is the color blue is connected to UFO technology and extraterrestrial intelligence, because we have Project Blue Book, we have the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we also have the color of the buses. It was a blue colored bus that takes you to Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3 to Area S4. We also have what's called the Blue Bloods. That's what aliens are called within the intelligence community. They're called Blue Bloods. Then we have something called the Blue Berets. This is the crash retrieval team that actually clean up these crash retrievals. So it's called the Blue Berets. Another point to keep in mind is back in 1977, under the Carter administration, we had an aircraft called HAV Blue. That was the predecessor to the F-117A stealth fighter. Also, Northrop built a technology demonstrator called Tacid Blue. So if we put Tacid Blue together with HAV Blue, we secretly have UFO technology. That's what they're telling us in their own code names. So they're secretly telling us that we have this. So we've got two cutaway illustrations of the sport model, and I just want to make mention that this was originally vetted out and drawn by Bob Lazar and John Andrews for the Testers Model Corporation. So I'm not claiming that I'm the origin point for this. What I did is I just took everything that Bob had talked about, put it into one drawing, and then made some 3D renderings. So that's just my addition to this whole thing. The sport model measured 52 feet in diameter. It had 3 levels. Bob never got into the top level here, but certainly this main deck here and then the gravity amplifiers, which are in the bottom section, he was given access to that. The reactor was in this location, and the 9 discs that he saw, or flying saucers that he saw at Area S4, he mentioned, had all the same type propulsion system.
Okay, but that's not nuclear, is it?
Well, it's a antimatter reactor. So whatever type reaction takes place with element 115 when it is bombarded inside the antimatter reactor, which actually is the power source which powers the gravity generators, however that actually comes together, it's certainly a almost near 100% thermoelectric generator. So it's a very efficient type system that, again, we could all use in our day-to-day lives.
Okay, so in other words, if it, I mean, I don't understand the technology you're talking about, but in essence, it's not using like a traditional nuclear fuel that's heavy and all that kind of thing, right?
Well, when that thing is bombarded, the radioactive decay is actually what's taking place here, but it's such a efficient system that it's like 99.9% efficient, something that we can't achieve here now.
Okay,
I mean, very
but
efficient.
it could fly in outer space, in other words, and go long distances without refueling is the idea.
Yes, when you have the Omicron configuration, that's used for flight around here and taking off, but the Delta configuration where they focus the center one forward and then the two into one section forming a cone, that's for deep space travel. The Delta configuration is for the deep space travel. What I thought was interesting is that Bob said that there was a honeycomb section where you could push your hand and then this thing would like unfold into a circular opening that gave you access to the bottom section here. I thought that was very, very interesting. I mean, where would you think of such a doorway to get in? Very unique way to do it. So when you put all this together, the fact that when Bob was interviewed by EG&G for this position, and they asked him not necessarily technical questions, but questions regarding how he would react when he was in a stressful environment at S4. Would he throw hammers and tools down? That just seemed like such a, at first, strange question, but yet you would want to know that if you're working on an alien craft. You would want to know how someone's mental state would be. So yes, that does seem to be consistent. So knowing what we know, again, about the color blue and how that's associated with UFO technology, we've talked about HAV blue, we've talked about tacit blue, we've really considered Project Blue Beam, and we know that Bob's bus from the Flight Test Center to S4 was blue. We also know that his security badge had two vertically striped blue areas, and then also the fact that on the second day of employment at S4 he was given blue folders to consider before working on the program. Put those three together and I personally feel that that actually adds to the credibility of the case. However controversial this case may be, I think that those three factors add credibility to the case.
Okay, very really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. We should talk about, I mean, what conversation about man-made vehicles would be complete without considering the, quote, Nazi Bell or the Die Glocke. Certainly this was made in the final years of World War II. Concentration camp victim survivors were involved with making the inner sections of where these were housed, and there were a number who were involved in the construction. We know a number of scientists were murdered who worked on this program. So we know that's for a fact. We know that SS General Hans Kammler was involved in this. Again, this is the Nazi Bell program. Now, what is actually happening here? They have a cerium-525, which is a radioactive isotope, and they're pumping liquid mercury into the upper section here. This is the bumper section in the lower area here. But if you can see here, there are two counter-rotating drums that interact with what Joseph Farrell believes, and we've all thought that the Roswell I-beam, the Kecksburg acorn, is there a connection between all three? Perhaps there is. Joseph Farrell believes that this is not in point of fact a written language, but this is a torsional pinch equation. How you interact with that hyperdimensional physics that Richard Hoagland talks about. So this really isn't a language, but this could be a mathematical torsion pinch equation. One thing to keep in mind that this vehicle was very toxic to humans and toxic to plants, because in under 24 hours, when this vehicle was turned on, any plants within the vicinity turned into black rubber. So it was very, very toxic. You wouldn't want to be around this thing when it was powered up. So again, that's very similar to...
Okay, and this comes from testimony from, are we talking paperclip scientists, or are we talking...
Yeah, we're talking about paperclip scientists. We're talking about the testimony and written statements from what we know to be left over from the 66 scientists who were murdered on this. I mean, they did leave notes and things, so we have some of that. We've got some of the concentration camp survivors. We've got eyewitnesses who saw smaller types of these vehicles hovering out of the test area. So absolutely, we do know that there was something to this bell, and if you do a side-by-side comparison, which you can see here, between the Nazi bell and the Kecksburg acorn, it's almost an identical type configuration. So we have to consider that perhaps this story goes back a lot earlier than perhaps we all have thought of before, and that the Kecksburg acorn may, in point of fact, be the Nazi bell.
Okay, and when the Kecksburg case is what year?
That's 1965.
Okay, and the Nazi bell would have been in the, are we talking the 1940s or the 30s?
The very closing years of World War II.
Okay.
Right in that time period. So maybe they did a deal, maybe SS General Hans Camelot cut a deal with the Americans for political immunity. We don't know that side of the story because he has disappeared off the face of the earth. There's no paperwork. There are 3 different stories to how he died. So that whole thing is a complete mystery. But clearly, what was done under General Hans Camelot was, in many cases, 50 years more advanced than what we had at the time. I mean, what did we have against the Me-262? We didn't have a really good jet fighter interceptor. We were still using piston-driven aircraft. So the Third Reich had a blank check. And over in America, we've got so much red tape that our engineers were hindered in what they could do. Over here in Germany, the Luftwaffe, in fact, the Nazi bell was given the highest classification of any program in Germany, period. Had the highest security classification. They were given free rein to think out of the box, and that's why they were more ahead of us at that time. Absolutely.
Right, and I recall that. We interviewed Igor Witkowski,
Yes.
I believe his name is, and he's done a lot of investigation in this area. We also went to one of the possible locations of the Nazi bell. But I was wondering, and I asked this of Joseph Farrell also, whether or not Werner von Braun would have been involved in that program. Have you ever come across any evidence of that?
No, I have not come across that.
Okay.
No, I have not come across that. One thing we could also consider too is when we talk about Roswell, Roswell took place July 3rd, 1947 at 11:59 p.m. That's 1 minute before midnight. And so that's important to keep in mind. To me, that sounds like a shot over the bow by someone else, perhaps by the Third Reich, letting us know that this whole thing isn't over yet, and that was a symbolic metaphor or message to us. It's just something to keep in mind. However, we need to also keep in mind too that we've got 3 distinct sites when we talk about Roswell. Number 1, we've got the debris field, okay? Number 2, a mile and a half east of the debris field, there was the ejection site where at least 2 bodies were ejected and they died. And then the final site, which is the quote impact site, is 30 miles east downrange of the debris field where we believe perhaps another 3 bodies were found. Now, what happened next was a very crash course cleanup operation using a low-boy 18-wheeler tractor-trailer truck, and we know this because there are multiple eyewitnesses who saw just such a vehicle. There was a convoy of 2 Jeeps up front and then 2 Jeeps up in back going right down Main Street to Hangar P3 Building 84 at Roswell Army Airfield. A historical fact. It's in Tom Kerry and Don Schmidt's book, Witness to Roswell, which is a fantastic book. Now, they reported that what was on the 18-wheeler lowboy tractor-trailer was an egg-shaped craft about 12 feet long, 7 feet wide, 6 feet high. But what's interesting here, it was covered by a tarp, but the exterior sections fore and aft were exposed, showing you what this thing looked like as it was driving down Main Street at Roswell. and then everybody saw this thing going into the hangar there where that big water tank is on base. So again, something was recovered, and both Don and Tom believe that this may be the, quote, escape pod associated with the vehicle. Now, I asked the question, number one, why would you need 2 teams of 50 men crisscrossing the debris field north of Roswell and then finish up with industrial vacuum cleaners if this is just a weather balloon? So someone please answer that question for me. Does that make any sense? Number two, why would you need an 18-wheeler tractor-trailer low-boy truck to move a weather balloon? You could put 50 weather balloons in the back of a Jeep. So that doesn't make any sense. Okay, so already we've wiped out the weather balloon. We've wiped out Project Mogul balloon. We've basically taken out the wooden test dummies. That doesn't fit in this equation. We have eyewitnesses, Colonel Walter Haut, who had seen this egg-shaped vehicle in Hangar P3 Building 84. We've got that testimony. We also have the testimony of a former 509th Bomb Group member who was in that hangar back in November. This is months after the actual event took place. He saw a teardrop-shaped vehicle with a honeycomb composite underbelly section loaded up into the cargo bay of a B-29. This is November 1947, and that's the shot we see right here. You can kind of see what it perhaps looked like in the hangar. Now we know that there were a number of flights associated with this debris. We have the flight by Pepe Henderson, who flew the C-54. We believe he flew out 2 bodies, so that was 1. We also have Straight Flush, which also perhaps flew out bodies. We had Dave's Dream, and then we had an aircraft called Up and Atom. These are all B-29s. Up and Atom is also definitely involved in this type retrieval. There were at least 5 boxes or wooden crates that were in the center of the hangar with a light shining down. There were military MPs surrounding the crates. 1 large crate was in this location here. And then once the smaller crates were loaded into the big crate, this particular crate went to Atomic Bomb Pit number 1. And this is interesting because what happened at that atomic bomb pit is very telling. They loaded this crate inside that atomic bomb pit, and then they put a double row security of MPs and security fences around that atomic bomb pit. So MPs stationed inside and outside in orders to shoot to kill anyone who breaches that security fence. Absolutely. So again, all over a weather balloon doesn't make any sense. So we have been lied to on so many levels. However, we're not saying at this point that what was recovered at Roswell was indeed extraterrestrial. We need to keep that open. However, we still must consider that there may be an earthly explanation, perhaps something from the Third Reich, and Joseph Farrell is going to get into that with his brand new book called Roswell in the Reich, and it is going to set off a firestorm in ufology, no doubt at all.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. This photograph, I want to ask you, is this a real photograph of the craft itself that was, or is this just a, I mean, what is this?
That's a secret. I can't talk about that. No, I'm kidding. This is a computer-generated forensic composite illustration based on the testimony of the witnesses who saw this vehicle going down Main Street in Don and Tom's book, Witness to Roswell.
Oh,
that's what
interesting.
That is.
Okay.
Yep. That's where that comes from. So.
All right. Well, our understanding is that if that was, in other words, a Nazi operation,
right,
that it possibly was also a time-traveling operation.
I suppose that's a possibility, because remember too, where were all the UFO sightings, or the majority of UFO sightings, originating from after World War II? Argentina. Who went to Argentina after World War II? Well, a whole group of the Third Reich went there. They set up shop in Argentina, and you can see, you can track the lineage of where this is going on. They were working on boundary layer control, they were working on laminar flow control, they were working on Horton flying wing type designs. Just, you know, the Horton 229 was years in advance of what we had flying here. So again, we do not want to underestimate the Third Reich and what they were working on. Just a fascinating level of technology. One thing to keep in mind is that witnesses who talked about the, quote, memory metal, some of the debris that was recovered in Roswell, they said that you could certainly crinkle it up and it would come back to its original form, but some of the witnesses said that you could blow through this memory metal, indicating it was a microporous material. Now that's important because if you had an aircraft, say this aircraft right here, and the skin of that aircraft was made out of this microporous material, you could in essence have the holy grail of aviation. So there's two holy grails of aviation. Number one is anti-gravity, number two is laminar flow control. So what they're doing with this microporous material is they are, quote, sucking in the boundary layer, allowing laminar flow to go back to almost 90% aft of the leading edge of the wing, thereby reducing the drag coefficient of the aircraft, making it significantly more efficient than anything in America at that time. So that's certainly another possibility. The reason why you could blow through the Roswell debris is because of this microporous material. Incidentally, if we talk about the, quote, trickle-down technology that Colonel Philip Corso had mentioned in his book The Day After Roswell, okay, we've got the transistor, we've got laser, we've got night vision, the integrated chip, we've got the accelerometers, we've got, even we're talking about Velcro. Interesting to note that each one of those technologies had a German antecedent before World War II. If you doubt me, go to Google, do an image search on German Panzer tank with night vision, and you will see it. Before 1947, the German tanks had night vision.
Okay.
And even on page 3 of Colonel Corso's book, he said that the Roswell craft, quote, looked German to him, that he had seen this before. So again, we've heard all this talk that, oh wow, the Roswell debris and all this trickle-down technology, that's how we got a big jump. No, the elements of the Third Reich had already developed these technologies before 1947. It's a historical fact. Check it out.
Okay,
Absolutely.
very interesting. Okay, well, I like the way you do research. Obviously, you're a real detail-oriented guy, so that's very valuable.
Hope so. Okay. It's been said that life is stranger than fiction because fiction has to make sense. So now we're going to get into the more crazy, zany, and wacky cases. Some of these cases are so weird, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is just way off the charts here. This is the famous I-5 UFO case, July 12, 2004. Multiple witnesses over a period of months had seen a very strange Avro Vulcan-looking aircraft make this ribbon looping pattern over I-5 multiple times, violating every FAA regulation. Because over a populated area, the FAA mandates that you're 1,000 feet above any person, place, or thing. You cannot drop down lower than 1,000 feet. However, this thing was flying 5 feet over traffic on I-5, so they're violating every FAA regulation we know of. So someone is going to be in trouble, or if it's an ET craft, clearly they won't be in trouble then, but somebody violated some serious regulations back in 2004. Absolutely, now a part of the historical record. The Flying Truss Bridge, I've called this the Flying Truss Bridge, sighted March 5th, 2003. I'll just read you the quick case file here. Sighting took place at 9:50 p.m. and lasted approximately 10 minutes. Craft caused pictures to fall off the living room wall and shook the entire house as it passed by overhead. Approximately a football field in length, and it had this truss beam type construction, just like you would see these vintage bridges or covered bridges. But what's interesting here, and we have this gentleman's original report, he said that this thing had a transparent section along each side of the triangle with this catwalk section here. But then he said, and this is interesting, he said that this vehicle was comprised of rusted rivets, in his words. So I'm asking the question, would an extraterrestrial race, perhaps 1 million years in advance of our own, be using rivets to fasten their aircraft together? It seems a little weird. Here is his original sketch that I redrew in AutoCAD. So Again, I'm not making this up. This comes directly from the QFOS files that anyone has access to. Originally at 2457 West Peterson Avenue in Chicago. They've now moved it, they're scanning it in, but these files are still available for research by the general public, and this is the origin point of where these cases come from. So I just want to make the point that I'm not making this up. These are original case files. Moving on to the next case. This was seen by two brothers. They were on top of their house. This was a 3-story house. They were fixing radio equipment. This thing flew over very silently, and he said that it was kind of like a greased ball bearing floating across the sky. It did not fly, but it floated. Those were his words. And we have his original sketch right here, 25 feet in diameter, silver with a series of very small portholes along the circumference of the vehicle. This upper crew compartment was 5 to 6 feet in diameter. So again, another case file within the QFOS. Here is the actual file itself with the case file number. So again, we're not making this up. This is now a part of the historical archives. Another case from the APRO, the NICAP files. In some of the cases, some of these are from QFOS and MUFON. 1973 flyover reported from Long Island. Now if you look here, this is the report on it, and what we had to start with was basically just this, almost a blacked out type illustration, and we were able to put this together based on the original sketch. But a couple was driving down the road near Long Island, and they were shocked to see what I'm calling a flying iron, okay, which had these strange rectangular lights here. And then there was a red light on the port and starboard side of the vehicle with these 2 posts sticking up and an ion-inducing rod connecting the top between the 2 posts. So where have we seen this configuration before? Well, if you look at the lifters that are all over YouTube, just type in lifters, you'll see this same type configuration where they're charging this section right here, and then this is being used as a ground, and then there's a lifting force. So maybe this was one of our early electric-powered flying machines which had a miniature power source on board that was small enough so they can actually fly it. So again, this is now a part of the historical archives. Another case from QFOS files. We have the original sketch. This is the original sketch that went with the case. There wasn't much to go on, but she actually called the sightings program during the 1990s, and this case was going to be featured on the sightings show. It's called the Counting Tower UFO sighted May 14th, 1988, Grisham, Oregon. Basically, it was 45 feet in diameter. It had a very interesting submarine or conning tower section. This part revolved. This section here did not revolve. And then there was this rectangular probe sticking up, and then 2 red lights in this location. This vehicle flew right by the car that she was driving in. And then after about a minute of this sighting, this particular vehicle went up to a commercial airliner that was flying by. It locked itself between the trailing edge of the main wing and the leading edge of the horizontal stabilizer and flew with that thing for about 30 seconds. And then, quote, after it got bored, that was her words, after it got bored, it flew away. So someone's flying this thing around here. Absolutely. The way she described it is, she said that it was inky black in color, which was identical, in her words, to the F-117A stealth fighter. So it had the same type color as the stealth fighter. Moving on to the next case. Here we have the Flaming Jet UFO, July 3rd, 1959, New Zealand. There were 2 crew members associated with this vehicle, measured 20 to 25 feet in diameter. There were 2 high-intensity green lights shining down. She was about 1/8 of a mile away from it. You can see the configuration of the helmets that the crew members were wearing. It came all the way down to their shoulders. That's very interesting. They were facing each other, and as this thing flew by, it stopped, it hovered. The 2 high-intensity green lights came down. This is a computer-generated forensic composite illustration of the vehicle. But then, after just a minute of the hovering flight, the 2 counter-rotating sections of the circumference of the vehicle started rotating in opposite directions, spewing out flames, and then this thing shot away at a high rate of speed. So again, a very interesting case, but using these counter-rotating flames. Certainly an interesting case. Moving on to this one. This came from the MUFON file here. This is NICAP because they also have some of their files.
And these are cases where the person themselves who's seen the craft have done the drawings originally?
Absolutely. That was the linchpin to recording these. I only wanted to take the cases where the eyewitness actually put together an illustration. So again, we're just not making this up. But this vehicle was seen by a group of children over a chicken wire fence chicken coop area. And as this thing flew by, they said that there was these hydraulic lines on the top of this vehicle and these strange square-like indentations or perforations coming out of the vehicle with a red and white light and these 4 lunar-like lander landing pads on the lower surface of the vehicle. So this is 13 May 1972. Okay, we have the Detroit disc sighted July 1967 near Detroit, Michigan. We didn't have much to go on here, but here's the original case file, and then here is his original sketch. So it says, drawing of object side view, band of lights revolving in direction indicated by arrow. So you can see how this thing was revolving. And what's interesting is, and this will become a little bit more important as we move on here briefly, is that there was a series of multicolored microcomputer processing lights associated with the midsection of the circumference of this vehicle flying over Detroit at that time. So another interesting case, approximately 100 feet in diameter.
Interesting.
Okay, this is the original sketch from the sighting itself. This was the, quote, Fat Frisbee case. Sighted December 1976, Dana Point, California. A mother and her daughter were driving down the road, not too far, right on Pacific Coast Highway near Dana Point, California, and this vehicle, which came right through her windshield area, I mean, she could see this in her windshield, it had thousands of multicolored microcomputer lights with a red light on top, and that's what you see in this illustration, almost identical to the Detroit disc. So someone's building these vehicles, flying them around, that has, it's like the same rental car company, maybe the same type configuration. So it says craft had thousands of computer-like lights along its upper and lower circumference. Absolutely. So we've got that case on file. This is an interesting case. This is the case over Brazil, October 5, 1996. Approximately 200 feet in diameter, about 300 feet high. This was a stealthy, faceted, what I'm calling the cone or volcano type vehicle. It had 3 perforated edges on each facet of the cone itself. A pilot who took off no more than 15 minutes, flying at about 5,000 feet, saw this vehicle, circled around it 3 times. He started getting really curious because the top section of this vehicle retracted down. A classic flying saucer came up into the vertical position, rotated down into the horizontal position 90 degrees down, and then this thing took off at a very high rate of speed. No sonic boom associated at all, and at that, this vehicle started rotating even faster, and he wanted to go up inside to look inside, not so that he could fly inside, but he wanted to see the upper section here where this disc came out. So he flew a little bit away from the vehicle, started gaining altitude, and then when he did that, red lights started shooting outside the upper section of this vehicle, and then this thing shot away at, quote, Mach 10, and he was horrified because he thought the transonic shock waves associated with a large vehicle departing in his vicinity would cause some huge, massive air disturbances, but to his surprise, there was nothing at all. So this thing took off at such a high rate of speed, there was nothing associated with its departure at all. Very interesting case.
Incredible.
Now this is the famous, and most people have heard of this before, very well documented case, the Rary, Idaho case. This is November the 2nd, 1967. Two men were driving down the road. This vehicle came right in front of their vehicle near their hood, and they were kind of like magnetically locked to the hood, although they weren't physically locked, but they were right there. The bubble canopy, transparent canopy, popped open. One of these small beings flew out who had a backpack on him. You know, again, this stuff is so weird you can't make this up. He opened up the car door, slid into the driver's seat while the driver and the passenger, you know, immediately went to the right side of the vehicle. He drove. It doesn't say how he reached the foot pedals because this guy was only, you know, very, very small. He drove this vehicle another 70 feet off the road, and then he started making these high-frequency bird chirping noises to the two people who were sitting on the right side of the vehicle. Well, clearly they were shocked out of their minds, okay? And you can see, here is the actual redrawn sketch from the original. Small men, approximately 3 feet tall, skin was rough, wearing backpacks and tight-fitting one-piece flight clothing. A series of multicolored lights along the circumference of the vehicle, clear, transparent canopy dome, and then down here there was this flame, but it wasn't a flame. There was a lighted section, kind of like a lightsaber, where you turn on a lightsaber and then the light goes to one certain point and stops. That's exactly how the lighting section on the bottom looked like. Again, the crew members had kind of like hamburger type texture for their faces. So, how the story ended is, one of these gentlemen, he came out of the car, ran up to a nearby house, they called the police came back, the one gentleman who was still in the vehicle was still in a state of shock, and it's now a part of the historical record. We have a massive amount of paperwork for this particular case. Here is the original sketch based on the eyewitness report, and this is the redraw from the original sketch. So again, this is now a part of the historical archives. One final report here. The Flaming Ellipse case, cited December 26, 1972 in Venezuela. Interesting case file, almost a football type configuration with two probes at the bottom. There was the location of the electronic arc in this section right here. Two of these things flew over this gentleman's apartment complex. This is the direction of flight here. But you'll see here that there are these tongues of flame that came out the aft section of the vehicle and also the port and starboard section of the vehicle. This is the side view of the exhaust detail. So think of this being multiplied on here, here, and here. And the flames, they came out like a tongue of flame, but then they stopped at a certain distance from the origin point. This is what the exhaust detail looked right here, and then this is the location of the electrical spark gap in this configuration. Now, this gentleman who wrote this report, this is his original sketch. We have his original sketch. We have a 4-page report describing the case. In his words, he felt that this is something that would not, quote, not be beyond the technology of the aerospace prime companies at the time. So again, we have this possibility of Lockheed, Northrop, Boeing, General Dynamics, Convair, perhaps being involved in some type of research using very advanced propulsion systems, which is again what Ben Rich had talked about when he said things that we have that are 50 years beyond what you could possibly even dream of.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, this is great, because I think that normally people are not able to get this kind of a testimony from somebody who is so clear and able to just outline things. Rather, you know, they need to normally go do a lot of research on their own. So hopefully this video will be useful to people that are entering the field, who are skeptics and who also are perhaps even members of the military industrial complex, sure, but at the same time they don't buy, you know, a lot of the UFO stories. So just given a bit of time here at the very end, let's I'm just wondering, is do you have some sort of last minute things that you want to talk about, or things that you'd like to cover in terms of where you're going next, even in your investigations, and what conclusions you're drawing at the moment?
Good question. Well, I would just like to say that I believe, just from what I've been doing the last 15 years, tracking down these cases, and again, I'm not making this up, please don't argue with me. I mean, I'm just showing you the original sketch, so argue with the witness instead. All I'm saying is I personally believe that 95% of what people are reporting as extraterrestrial UFOs are, in point of fact, our own deep black programs paid for by our tax dollars, and the remaining 5% represent the core of reality of this phenomenon. So where I'm going from this is I'm going to continue knocking on doors, I'm going to continue to cause waves and cause controversy and press buttons, and I'm going to continue to research and interview test pilots, Lockheed Skunk Works engineers. I want to find out what the level of technology is for the 1980s up to our time, see if some of that technology can be declassified, put within the public domain. Obama has stated that he has a new, quote, government of transparency policy. Well, I've filed multiple Freedom of Information Act requests and got nowhere, so we have to call him on that because he's not being progressive and proactive in that case. And hopefully we can get some of these technologies declassified so that we can all benefit from this technology.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michael Schratt. I wish you good luck with all the work that you're doing, and we thank you for your service to humanity.
Thank you, Kerry.